Oh, I might tell you, too, that my father, who was a machinist and pipe fitter and so on, actually worked on the what at the time was the latest development of the Lachine Canal.
I see.
In the 1920s.
Yes.
He worked on the mill in Corner Brook, and then left and went to Montreal for 5, 6, 7 years.
I went to school on the banks of the Lachine Canal.
Did you?
At Darcy McGee High School.
Yeah. Well, of course, today, now it's in effect the St. Lawrence Seaway.
Yeah.
But nobody realized that at the time.
Yeah. So right along Wellington Street.
That's right.
Wellington Street parallels it.
Yeah. So, you know, we have some
my grandfather
connections there.
My grandfather had a store on Chablis Square.
Now, I'm not sure exactly where that is.
That's right opposite the end of the railway, the Grand Trunk Railway.
All right.
That's the big square there.
Yeah.
And right now there's an astronomical museum there.
I would say that the Dominion Bridge Company, I don't know if they were involved in the
my father was
Quebec Bridge.
My father was the head of the Montreal Tramways Company.
Ah, I see, okay.
He was the operating head.
Yeah, very good.
He didn't own the company. That was owned by Brazilian Traction.
Yeah. Well, Tom, we have more in common than we thought.
Yeah.
But I met you originally in Labrador.
That's right.
I was Minister of Mines when the Upper Churchill was beginning. The Upper Churchill project was beginning, and you were the chief architect of that.
Under Don McParland.
That's right, Don McParland.
He was the head of the company.
He had been here, and I think spoke. You can tell me more about this. I think spoke to the Rotary Club
to the Canadian
about the fixed link, which you've been trying to promote ever since.
That's right.
Tell us more about that.
Well, the fixed link is probably the most urgent need of this province. A lot of people think that electricity is, but actually, with the loss of the lumber industry, which is disappearing, the forest industry, the loss of the mining industry, and we don't have any large mines on the island as we used to. We've got to depend on the hospitality or the visitors. We have to depend on them. That's the future of this province. It's just like Ireland. It's in the tourism industry.
That's correct.
Now you've got to have, in order to have the tourism industry, you have to have a fixed link.
Well, you have to have reliable
transportation,
inter-country transportation.
You have to have it. Yeah. It should have been written into the terms of union, written in 1948. It should have been a part. And it was a shame. PEI waited until 1873 in order to incorporate the fixed link into their arrangement with Canada. And they didn't join Canada until it became a part of the Constitution. And that should have been a part of the Constitution of Newfoundland, and the terms of union between Joey Smallwood and the authorities in the Canadian federal government. It should have been very clearly stated that a fixed link was an urgent federal responsibility.
And would come in time. To replace the ferry service.
To replace
it's amazing to me, Tom,
and to bring dependable transportation.
It's amazing to me that no government of Newfoundland has raised this issue and initiated, I'll give him credit, initiated the kind of negotiation that Mr. Peckford did when he said, look, we need money for the Trans-Canada. The train is too slow. Nobody's using the train anymore. It's uneconomic as a narrow gauge operation.
Right.
So give us 20 years of your railway losses so we can work on the highways, and then you can wrap up the railway. And we should be doing the same thing with the ferry boats.
You couldn't say anything more true.
Yeah.
To me, there's, as I said at the beginning, Bill, there's nothing, absolutely nothing more important to this province than reliable transportation. And reliable transportation requires a fixed link. Yeah. Just to give you an idea, the average auto transportation annually from the mainland of North America into the island is around 120,000. 120,000 reliable cars come across the ferry a year. Across the fixed link between New Brunswick and PEI, there's 1.2 million.
And there you go.
It's 10 times, and we are at least 10 times the size of PEI.
Your argument is proved right there.
I worked on that. I was hired by the Canadian federal government to be a part of that transportation, and I recommended that the fixed link had to be completed. That's part of history, and as a result of that, I immediately saw the absolute need for the transportation connection across the Strait of Belle Isle between North America and the island of Newfoundland.
Now, Tom, this wasn't a new idea with you. It was to have been part of the original Upper Churchill development.
That's right. That was Don McParland and I. He said that as soon as we finished, got the job done on the Upper Churchill, that we had to start on the Lower Churchill and the fixed link.
This was phase 2, right?
Phase 2. Yeah. And it was one of the greatest mistakes that Canada ever made, was to eliminate the ownership of the Upper Churchill by expropriating Brinko.
Not Canada, Newfoundland.
Newfoundland expropriating Brinko.
Yeah. And for a number of reasons, too, because it's not unlikely that Newfoundland had a good case against the Churchill Falls Corporation, not against Quebec, not against Canada, but against the Churchill Falls Corporation for the recall of power.
That's right.
And that was extinguished by the fact that Newfoundland expropriated the Upper Churchill and therefore would have had to sue itself.
And Frank Moores, the premier at that time, admitted before he died that was the worst mistake that he ever made in his life.
And we're living with it today.
And we're living with that mistake today. Yeah. And it seems as though there still is a fairly substantial number of bureaucrats, I call them. Maybe that's an unkind word, but it defines the people. That these are people that have only one responsibility, and that is to taxpayers, when in fact they should be responsible to investors.
Yeah. Well, of course, this is how the Upper Churchill started, as a privately funded, investor-owned corporation.
As soon as
and was changed by that expropriation.
Yeah, as soon as Joey Smallwood took power, he went over to see Churchill.
That's right.
And Churchill arranged with the Rothschild family, the Rio Tinto family, who formed the background of Brinko.
Yep.
And Don McParland worked for the Rio Tinto. That's when I met Don, when he worked at Elliott Lake and Sudbury, just near Sudbury, on the uranium projects for the Rio Tinto. And that's when I met Don. And Don told me that he wanted me to work with him because I had been an engineer with Inco for 18 years, and I probably was one of the few people that understood how to design and build large underground cavities.
Now, Tom, the fact that the Upper Churchill was expropriated and became, in effect, a crown corporation of the Newfoundland government doesn't erase the fact that this started out as a private company. And the other day I went looking for information, and of course all you have to do is go to the Legislative Library, and it's all there.
That's right.
1961, the Newfoundland government gave a lease to the Hamilton Falls Power Company, later changed to Churchill Falls,
Yes.
To do that development. So it was completely their job, completely their project.
So that was,
And it was a
we
unanimous
used to call
decision.
them Churchill Falls Labrador Corporation.
Well, that was another name.
Yeah.
That's right.
That company was owned by Brinko.
That's right. And then later the Churchill...
And Brinko was owned by the Rio Tinto,
Yeah.
which is the Rothschild family.
And a lot of other companies involved, like Bowaters and the Rothschilds Bank and most of the big corporations in the world.
They formed Brinko,
But the
British
decision,
Newfoundland Corporation.
the decision to provide Brinko with the right to do that development was made by unanimous vote of the House of Assembly in the spring of 1961. And that meant that Brinko, as a private company, just like any other private company that starts a mine or
Yes.
a forest company or whatever, using natural resources, Brinko got the right there to do that development. So this idea that the present Nalcor built the Upper Churchill or any of that nonsense makes you wonder where people are getting that information.
Pure nonsense. Yeah, it's pure nonsense, because
Yeah,
you know
absolutely.
that, and I know that.
Yeah.
And it's a shame that the people of Newfoundland are not being given an opportunity to talk about this, because I understand that the present government are determined to pass through this Lower Churchill idea under the guise of it being the Lower Churchill development, when in fact it is just a bunch of bureaucrats who, since they've been formed, and with the taking over of Brinko, the expropriation of Brinko by the provincial government, when that occurred, that was the biggest mistake. And Joey and Frank Moores admitted it before he died.
That's right, he did. Tom, what do you make of what's happening now with the muskrat development?
This is one of the. I'll soon be, within a few months, have completed my 100. I'm in my 100th year now.
Yes, I know.
This is the.
I can't wait to congratulate you.
This is the worst proposal I have ever seen in my life. With the worst engineering proposal I have ever seen in my life, and I have been an engineer now since 1939.
It's a pretty confusing picture, isn't
How
it?
long ago was that? That's
Well,
about
it's,
70 years old.
70 years ago.
Nearly 75 years
Yeah.
ago.
But what do you make of it, of the project itself? What?
To me, it's an impossible problem. As I think I went into that in my letter to which the St. John's Telegram was kind enough to produce.
Yes, very recently. You did
Very
a letter.
recently.
Yeah.
I think I outlined that, and if anybody wants to see that, they can see that. And if they want more information than is in that, I'm sure that we can provide it for them. Because I've already made several talks on this subject.
It seems to me very, very strange, almost bizarre, that you have, senior officials of the government, the Premier herself even, the former Premier,
Yes.
all appearing not to know the history of the project.
It's one of the strangest experiences that I have to undergo. And I have to undergo it every morning when they talk about it on the news. This is a letter from the government after I had sent in my proposal.
Okay.
And you just read the second paragraph there. Can you read it out loud?
Yes, I will. But now, before I do, I'll just repeat my question. If you were the boss, if you were running this project today in the year 2012, going into 2013, I think that's right.
That's right.
What approach would you take to it? Now, this is a letter from Newfoundland Hydro, which I guess is Nalcor as well.
Yes.
To you from Mr.
The
Bennett.
vice president.
Mr. Bennett, the vice president.
Yeah.
And it says in part, government and hydro will not be pursuing the development concept to combine a fixed transportation link, development of the Lower Churchill, and privatization of the province's electricity sector as outlined in your proposal. So it sounds like they have summarily said, we don't like your proposal.
They have no intention of even studying it.
Right. So
now,
you tell us what is your proposal.
How in the world can an engineer say that he has completely studied any kind of a project dealing with the Lower Churchill, including the Muskrat Falls idea, which, as I said before, Bill, is the worst idea I've ever heard of in my engineering experience. And to saddle the taxpayers of this province with the $10 billion cost, as some people have estimated, they may say maybe one side or the other of $10 billion, but roughly
it could be more.
Roughly $10 billion. Yep. To saddle the taxpayers of this province with such an enormous expense on a fruitless project, on a project which has no attachment at all to the transportation problems of this province, and for that matter, very little attachment to the real electrical needs of the province. For them to do that and say in a letter to me that they have no intention of studying it, and then say that they have studied the idea completely, it's almost impossible to believe that anybody could say that.
But yet it's here in the letter, we will not, or Hydro will not be pursuing the development concept as outlined in your proposal.
That's right.
Now, tell us, what is your proposal? What should they be doing?
Well, it's in two.
I have a map here.
It's in two parts, Bill.
Which I can hold up for you.
For the first part, at the present time, the electrical power for the people of the island of Newfoundland is served by Newfoundland Power, which is a subsidiary of a company called Fortis,
correct,
which is an investor corporation.
Yep.
I happen to be a small shareholder of it.
Me too.
Very small, but still, it's an investor corporation. And I have decided that this is a worthy corporation to invest in. Now, the government, the present government of Newfoundland has decided, as you saw in the letter, that they are not going to pursue that. Yeah. They're not even going to study it. Yeah. Now, how can you say that you've studied the problem in depth or in full if you say at the beginning of your letter, in a written letter to me, that you have no intention of following that? You know, no intention of studying it. How can you say that? How can that make sense to anybody?
But they do say it.
But they say it.
Yeah.
So in other words, they are denying what they say they are doing. On one hand, they say that they are open to all ideas, whereas you see in a letter, they are not open to any ideas other than those proposed by bureaucrats of the present government.
Now, Tom, tell us, what is your proposal?
My proposal is to state this. First of all, that you put the federal government, it's in two parts. The first part is to create a new Trans-Canada Highway along the north shore of the Gulf of St. Lawrence that would fill the 350 kilometers distance from Seven Islands, the missing 350, from Seven Islands to
Blanc-Sablon or
Blanc-Sablon,
whatever the terminus might be.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's the first part, for the federal government to do that. Now, the federal government is obligated to pay roughly 80% of the cost of that. So it's a very modest cost for the taxpayers to undertake to fill that. As a matter of fact, until it enters the province of Newfoundland, Labrador and Newfoundland, on the north shore of the Gulf of St. Lawrence, they don't pay anything.
That's correct.
The federal government,
Highway is already there.
And Hydro-Quebec would be obligated to pay that cost. So we'd only pick up the cost once it enters this province. But it's a brand new connection from the central part of the continent of Newfoundland, of North America, including New York, Montreal, Toronto, Chicago.
Easy accessibility
and permanent accessibility in a very short time, and reliable accessibility.
No ferries tied up in port
the
for
ferries
days.
the ferries can remain for the kinds of things.
Well, they could, yes.
I wouldn't eliminate them
As tourist boats.
But as far as the actual urgent need for reliable transportation from the mainland of North America to the island of Newfoundland, this proposal of mine would be carried out by a new Trans-Canada highway along the north shore of the Gulf of St. Lawrence and across the Strait of Belle Isle.
Now, how would this complement or be complemented by the Lower Churchill development?
Now, the next part 2, I gave you part 1.
Yep.
Part 2 is very simple. Part 2 states that investors should be invited, and not taxpayers, but investors should be invited to participate in a new company that probably could be under the direction of Newfoundland Power. Newfoundland Power are doing a very good job under Fortis now. We get very reliable. The light behind me is supplied by Newfoundland Power and has been supplied for about 100 years by Newfoundland Power. It's one of the first companies formed in this.
That's correct.
Even before we were a province of Canada. So, I mean, it's a reliable organization, and it's investors, and it doesn't place any obligation on the part of taxpayers. You've got to understand the difference between taxpayers and investors. Taxpayers are obligated to pay for infrastructure that's used in this province, and they should be.
Yeah.
But any new resources, just like our oil, for that matter, our fisheries, were done by small investors, mostly by small investors, some by large investors. The iron ore is an investor corporation. That's an investor corporation. The new,
meaning no government money involved.
As a matter of fact, it's a source of revenue for the government. So it becomes a taxpayer source because those resources belong to the people of this province. They don't belong to the bureaucrats or to the government. They belong to the people of this province. And for that reason, the people should be allowed to study a proposal like I've submitted, which calls for an investor corporation to be responsible for the production of all power in the whole province as one company.
Now, what about the actual development, Tom?
The development then would be left to this company. They could, for example, I don't know whether this would be one of the things they would do. This would require detailed study. But they could even purchase Hydro-Quebec's interest in the Upper Churchill.
That's correct. And then Quebec will be out of the picture.
And as far as I can see, they could do that legally because that resource belongs to the people of this province.
That's right.
So the people of this province, if they wanted to state that that resource had to be purchased by a company incorporated within this province, like Fortis, then or Newfoundland Power, then that company would become responsible for the production of power in the whole province, in all of Labrador, and in all of the island. The production of all power, all energy.
Now, Tom, at the
they should be able to seek the support of the federal government in doing that.
They should. At the annual meeting of Fortis 2 years ago, I asked the question of why Fortis was not involved. And Mr. Marshall, the chief executive officer, answered that they had been interested and they had been invited, but they were not interested in being in as a minority shareholder in which the government was a majority.
And I don't blame them.
No, I don't blame them either, and not just this government.
No, as a matter of fact, I would not be a shareholder of the company if they did that.
But, you know, that seemed to me to leave open the prospect that if they could go in and with their own company, as you just described, rather than having to go in as a minority of a government-owned country, if they could go in on their own and do it, they would do it.
That's right.
And they're the most successful power company, I think, in Canada.
Well, they're all over the world now.
That's right.
They're producing power in New York City. They're producing power in South America. So, I mean, they are a very outstanding worldwide corporation. And I think they could actually raise the money in order to purchase the contract, and they could do it under the laws.
They're a multi-billion-dollar company.
They could raise the money to pay to take over Hydro-Quebec's interest in the Upper Churchill completely.
Could I ask you if you have spoken with Dr. Bruno or Mr. Marshall?
I've talked with Angus Bruno's son.
Yes, Stephen.
Stephen.
But his father, of course, was the founder of Fortis.
And his father is a very close friend of mine. His father hired me to be a professor at the university.
Yes, he would have,
in 1974.
As the Dean of Engineering.
Yeah. And he asked me, I remember he called me on the telephone, and he asked me, how would I like to be a professor at Memorial University? And I told him, when do I start?
So have you spoken with him?
I never even asked the salary.
Have you spoken with him about this?
Yes, I have.
And their interest?
I don't want to put words in his mouth. I'll let him
I understand
speak for himself. But my understanding is that Stephen Bruno has proposed that natural gas.
He has. I was at the lecture.
And there's nothing wrong with that kind of a proposal. It has to be evaluated. It has to be studied. But it's a very important proposal.
That's correct.
And he should be given credit for it.
Yeah. Well, he's getting very little credit for it. He's getting, as most people, knowledgeable people who are trying to...
The saddest thing that has occurred to me in my life in this province is the formation of a company of bureaucrats whose only support are taxpayers, and where they have been, the idea of investors has been totally eliminated, purposefully eliminated, as you saw in the letter from the vice president of that company.
Tom Kierans, I want to thank you for giving us this time today. It's a terribly important issue and development for this province, and I only hope that the people who have the power to direct it will listen to the words of a man who's not only been involved in engineering all his life, but who has seen power developments around the world and knows what he's talking about. And when they say, oh, we're not hearing from the experts, if they hear from you, they won't be able to say that anymore.
I could show you a manual that was prepared by the American Society of Civil Engineers. That's in the United States. There's a Canadian Society of Civil Engineers. I'm a fellow of that organization. But I was the only Canadian that was invited to write the manual on nuclear power and structures, nuclear power facilities and structures.
Structural analysis and design of nuclear plant facilities.
Now look at the editors of that.
Oh yes, I see it.
Now do you see, Tom?
The editing board and task force chairman.
Those are people from all over the world.
Yep.
The only Canadian that has participated in the writing of this manual
is T.W. Kierans.
That's myself. And I'm very proud to have that.
Yep. Well, Tom, thank you again. And
there's a letter in here which thanks me for my work on this book.
I can only hope that the people with the power, and I don't mean electricity, the people with the ability to make things happen in this province will, if I can put it this way, take the advice of a man who knows.
Well, I'm not going to be here very much longer. As I said earlier, Bill, I'm going to be. I'm in my 100th year now.
I realize that, and we hope we'll be here.
I will have completed it in February of 1913.
Well, we'll come here again in March and have another chat.
Well,
before then, probably, but certainly in March.
Well, I think we've opened up the thing, and I think you understand. There's two proposals, just to re-emphasize them. The first proposal is to create a new Trans-Canada Highway along the north shore of the Gulf of St. Lawrence in Quebec, and then into Newfoundland, and then across the Strait of Belle Isle to the island of Newfoundland. That's point number one. Point number two is to ensure that investors, an investor corporation, not taxpayer corporation, not a corporation like the Milkyar, which is now has to depend on taxpayers for its sustenance.
Not Newfoundlanders having to go out and borrow $10 billion.
That's right.
At a time when we're saying we have to cut back.
When there are investors who would be very anxious and willing to take it over under the right conditions, under favorable conditions.
Tom, it's good to talk to you today, and we'll see you again in March.
Well, thanks very much, Bill.
If not before.
It's been a pleasure. God bless you.
You too.